Going to be setting up the F5 Big IP with service insertion with Cisco API using iWorkflow. This demo will go step by step on how to configure everything. All the products that I've used here, the APIC, the Big IP, and iWorkflow, are all the same versions that are typically presented at Cisco events that demo this functionality, whether it's a seminar or a tech talk or a workshop. I try to keep the versions all the same, so there's a lot of documentation out there so you can follow along, and all the screens and all the various options match up. So for the Cisco APIC, I'm using version 2.1.1H. For the Big IP, I'm using TMOS version 12.1.1 hotfix 1. And for iWorkflow, I'm using version 2.0.2. Now, please keep in mind, I realize that there are more current versions of this software out there. But like I said, I tried to keep everything consistent with the lab guides and the different deployment guides that are available on F5's website as well as Cisco's support site. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to follow along in the lab guide, as I mentioned. So we're going to start off with iWorkflow. So I've logged in as admin. So we'll just follow along. So I'm going to go ahead, and the first step is discover the Big IP device. It looks like it's collecting the data now, so that's good. So the next thing we're going to do is create a web application template. Give it a name. Call it web. Select all the options, all clouds. Application type, we'll go ahead and select the application services integration template. I'm using version 1.0_001 version or subversion 8, I believe. Again, there are newer versions of this out here, but to keep it consistent with all the documentation, we're going to select this one. So we're going to make a couple fields tenant editable. So when we're in the Cisco APIC and we're provisioning the different services, we'll have the option to go ahead and define the port. Save this. Now we'll go ahead and create our cloud connector. Just call it F5 Cloud. This will be Cisco APIC. And we'll go ahead and save that. So if we double click that, you'll notice that it created the device package for Cisco APIC. So that is based off of this web catalog that we created here, which we called web. Let's go in here. Let's click on this. So we've gone ahead and saved that to okay. So now we're done with iWorkflow. So just to review, we created a catalog which we called web. So this is based on the application integration, application services integration IAP. So we built out essentially an IAP template, and we published that to the cloud connector, which made a device package. So let's go into the APIC, and we're going to go ahead and import that that package. Just double click on that. That's what we just saved. And F5 Cloud, it went ahead and downloaded it. Right, so verify that it brought in all the different parameters from the IAP, which you did. So if we go under the L4 through 7 functions and we click on web, again, this is what we created in iWorkflow. If we click on that and then we click on operational, you'll see that these are the two environment fields that we made tenant editable. So it's required true. So essentially this means that we have to fill in the values for that. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do is we need to create a device manager. So we'll go to inventory, device manager types, there's nothing here. You can right click this and do create manager type, or you can go over to actions and create it here. We'll call this F5 model. We can call iWorkflow, doesn't really matter what you call it. For the version, this is absolutely critical that you type in this exactly like this. You have to start off with 2.0 and the dash and the name of the cloud that you defined within iWorkflow. And if you recall, I called it F5 Cloud. So this is a requirement, 2.0, the dash, and then the name of the cloud connector within iWorkflow. Select this. This matches. This is what we pulled in from the device package. Click on that. And then we can go ahead. We don't need to submit anything. We don't need to create anything else here. We'll go ahead and hit submit. Okay, so we're going to go to our tenants. We're going to go to our common tenant, which is kind of equivalent to like the common partition. The big IP kind of holds all the configuration information, and then you can create individual tenants, and I'll create a demo tenant here before we got started. But we'll, excuse me, we'll go ahead and create a device manager here in the common tenant. So what we're going to essentially do is in the common tenant here, we're going to create a device manager and essentially link it, if you will, to the iWorkflow management IP to the device manager type that we just created in the previous step. So it's going to link those together. Let's go through L4 through 7 services, device manager. Go ahead and we can create it here, or again, you can go to actions. We'll just right click and do create device manager. The device manager name, we can call it F5 cloud dash device manager. This can really kind of be anything. The management EPG we'll leave blank for now. The device manager type, we'll go ahead and select that. And we'll click the plus key here for the management. So we're actually going to be defining the iWorkflow information here. So hit the plus key. The host is going to be the IP address or host name of iWorkflow. In this case, for me, it's 10.10.10. And the communication port is, communication port is 443. So now we'll go ahead and put in the user credentials for iWorkflow. Again, these are the credentials for excuse me, iWorkflow. Go ahead and submit that. Okay, so now we're going to create an L4 through 7 device and start configuring all the options that we just created. Again, we can right-click this and create the L4 through 7 device. So go ahead, make sure that it's managed. That box is checked. We'll go ahead and give it a name. We'll just call this Big IP. It is an ADC. In my environment, I'm using a physical F5 device. I'm using a single F5 device. You have the option, if you created a VE in a virtual environment, for like a VMware, you can choose that. So physical domain. So I have one that's called F5 domain. One of the things to keep in mind is as you're going through the different configuration screens, especially when you get to creating endpoint groups and things like that, when you're actually in the configuration, you have the option of creating the particular construct when you're actually in the configuration screen. You can kind of exit out, create what you need, and then come back in. However, for physical domain, this has to be created before you start this whole process. You'll notice that this is pre-populated already, and it doesn't give you an option to create anything else. So I went ahead and created a physical domain, and then in that physical domain, I associated with that a dynamic VLAN pool, and you'll have to do that ahead of time or work with Cisco APIC SME that's on staff or a Cisco engineer to get that set up. So one of the things that, I'll just stop here and make a brief pause for just a second and tell you that, it's really important that you work with a Cisco engineer or somebody that knows the networking side of the APIC. We really don't want to get involved with any of the networking aspects. The Cisco Fabric is complicated enough without having to worry about configuring that as well, in addition to the application services. So I'm going to select my domain. It's going to be a single node. I don't have an HA pair or a cluster. Then I'm going to go ahead and select the device package, and then I'm going to go ahead and click on unknown manual. And this is just going to give us more options that we can configure manually. And then we want out of band, and we're going to put in the credentials. Now these are going to be the credentials of the big IP, not iWorkflow. If you remember, we created that device manager in earlier steps, and we put the iWorkflow information there. So this is going to be the big IP. Okay, so we're going to go management IP. This is going to be the management IP address, again, of the big IP. The port is going to be HTTPS. We don't have to worry about the chassis value because we're not on a Viprion. So we'll go ahead and create our device interfaces. So these are going to correspond to in my case, a physical port on the big IP. Typically, you're going to refer to these, if you go into the F5 GUI, they're under interfaces, they're 1.1, 1.2, 2.1, whatever. So within the Cisco APIC, the period is an unrecognized character. So we're going to do sort of like a mapping, if you will. So 1_1 corresponds to the 1.1 interface. So it's just something that you're going to have to kind of keep in mind. Now I do have this big IP physically connected to the Cisco Fabric, so that 1_1 port is associated with that port on one of the 9K leaf switches. So I'm going to update that, and I'm going to add another interface, 1_2. Oops, 1_2. And this is going to be on port 3, if I can find it. And go ahead and update that. So now the cluster interface, you'll see that it auto-populated it with a big IP. We actually are going to want to put the iWorkflow management interface address here, HTTPS, the device manager is going to be the device manager that we created in the last step. You can kind of see it right here. That's where we created this. And that had values for iWorkflow as well. So we're essentially, in a way, kind of defining the iWorkflow credentials in a couple places, but this is where we're going to be referencing it. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and create our interfaces that we can refer to within the APIC for our endpoint group. And so here we're going to be creating our consumer and provider constructs. So we'll go ahead and click the plus sign here, and the type is going to be, the first one we'll do is consumer, and this is going to reference the external interface or external VLAN. So you'll notice these are going to correspond to what we created up here. So we'll update that. We're going to add another one. We're going to add provider. This is going to be internal. It's going to be the other interface. we'll click on updates. We have consumer provider. Again, your mileage may vary. I'm following the steps in the, as I mentioned, in the deployment guides and the lab guides. But your mileage may vary here. It could be interfaces within a virtual environment, or perhaps these are called something else for your particular environment. So verify all the information is correct here, and then go ahead and click Next. We're going to click on All Parameters. We're going to expand the device host section, and we're going to give this our big IP a host name. We'll just call it demo.marsh.com. We'll go ahead and update. You'll notice here that we can update other parameters on the big IP, NTP, DNS. Just for the sake of simplicity here, I'm going to skip those. Keep it simple. And once we finish that, we updated the changes. I'll go ahead and click Finish. So if we expand this, we can click on what we just created. And the one thing to keep in mind in this screen, this is an important step, to go back to L4 through 7 devices and click on the device that you just created. You'll notice that our configuration state is in initialization. So it's really important to leave this screen up until you get a stable. If it goes to any type of thing other than stable, it goes to an error or something happens, the best thing to do is to stop right here and start looking at perhaps some faults. Here's the fault section right here. And start doing a little detective work on kind of what went wrong. Because if you continue with anything other than a stable state further on in the lab, nothing will work. And so your best bet is to, maybe you misconfigured something, or you fat-fingered a password or something. But again, the best bet is always make sure you wait until this thing goes stable, which it just did. So we're good to go there. Okay. Okay. So now that we've created our device, we created it in common. So what we want to do now is we actually want to use this configuration in another tenant called demo. So we're going to go ahead and right-click this, and we're going to export it. So we're going to export it to the demo tenant and hit submit. So if we go to the demo tenant and we expand L4 through 7 services and we expand L4 through 7 devices, you'll notice that there is nothing there. So this is something to keep in mind, because later on in the guide, it asks you to verify if inaccurate, because we actually exported it, so it's going to be under imported devices. So just a little something to keep in mind. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a service graph. So let's go ahead and right-click here and create service graph. Give the graph a name. We'll call it web. Kind of keep everything consistent. We're going to create a new one. I'm just gonna click on this and bring it over and drag it over. So I just left clicked on that, dragged it over. We're going to call this ADC. The N1 will automatically be highlighted. You can just call that ADC. We're going to create a 2-armed configuration. Under Profile, we're going to select the profile that we've been working with and creating throughout this demo. We'll click on that. we'll click on Submit. So the next step is to deploy that service graph. So we're going to go ahead and expand that. That's our newly created service graph template. We're going to right click on that and say Apply. So the first thing we need to do is to, again, this is probably where you're going to be working with the local, if you're demoing this for a customer or working with a customer setting this up, obviously you're going to have to get involved with them to set up the different networks. So if I pull this down, you'll notice that this is what I was referring to earlier. This gives you the option of creating a consumer endpoint group if you hadn't created one already. So I've already created these, so I have, again, here's the tenant is demo, and I've created an endpoint group called web. So I'm going to select that here, and then I'm going to come over here for the provider, and this is going to be the app. So essentially what I'm setting up here is your typical 3-tiered web app DB type scenario where you're going to have a service graph between the web servers and the app servers, and creating services that that path will consume between those two different portions of the application. So I've gone ahead and created those, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a new contract here. So we'll just call this a web contract. Click Next. Okay, so you have to specify a bridge domain. Again, this is something that excuse me, you can work with your local Cisco engineer or on-site SME if you're doing this for a customer. I'm just going to select, this is a default value that's already been created. I didn't have to create this. I just chose it as a default bridge domain setting within the APIC. Cluster interface, these are, if you recall, these are what we created earlier when we created the interfaces using the 1_1 and the physical connectivity of the big IP to the switch. So I'm going to click external. This is going to represent the external here, and the provider is going to be internal. Go ahead and click Next here. I'm going to click on All Parameters, and anything within red are defaults or values that need to be configured. So if I go ahead and expand network relation, for example, we have some options here to fill out. So I'm just going to go through these and fill in the different values. So now I'm going to define an external self IP. Same thing for the internal self IP. No, I'm only using a single device. So update, so you have to update each field, so something to keep in mind. I'm just double clicking these, clicking on the field. entering the value, clicking update, port lockdown will be default. Okay, so we can collapse these. I'm not going to worry about route or anything like that. So for under function config network relation, select network. I'm going to go over here and select network. This is a really important step that's easy to overlook. And essentially this step associates the network information under device config that we did up here to the big IP virtual server. We updated that. So we're going to come down here to web. We're going to double click this web-default, and we're just going to backspace over that and get rid of the -default. Okay, and click on update. Again, this is an important setting. So we can go to our pool members. And we'll give our pool members an IP address. Matches the subnet that for the internal servers that we created earlier. Let's verify that's right. Okay, we're in the 30 subnet. I'm only going to create one pool member for now, just as an example. The address for the pool address is going to be the virtual server. So this is going to be on the external interface. And one thing that you'll notice here is port. This actually appeared because in iWorkflow, when we created our catalog, we chose the pool port to be tenant editable. So I can go in here and change that if I wanted to. Let's make sure that we have everything properly configured here. Click on Finish. So you don't have to hit Submit. Just clicking on Finish will actually deploy the template, and then so this should have deployed that template. So if we go over to iWorkflow and log in, we should see all the artifacts that were created. So here it created our iWorkflow member node. 30.32 is the member. It created a new APIC tenant. It created services. Okay, so these are the services based on the cloud that we created. There's a red mark here because I actually don't have a pool member. That pool member is not created, it's not active, so we're going to get an error because that actually doesn't even exist. So if I double click this, the tenant information created by device package available clouds F5 cloud. So you can verify that that was indeed created. We can cancel out of here. Double click this. You can kind of look at the information that we found here. Application type, web application is unhealthy or unavailable because the member node I don't actually have created. So we were successful. So it built everything within iWorkflow. So let's go to the big IP and see if it built out everything within the big IP. Log back in there. Okay, so if I go to, well, the first thing we can look at is look at the common partition, or the partition, and we'll see that the APIC did build out a new partition and a new route domain within the big IP. So that is correct. So we can click on that. Go to local traffic, virtual servers. It built out our virtual server. So if we click on that, built out all the parameters for us. We go to resources. It created a pool. So if we go down to pools, we should have one member in that pool, which we do, which is what we created. So everything looks good. So if we go to device management, device groups, created a device group. So I'm going to take this opportunity. So actually, before I get to that, so we're done with this portion of the lab. So really, this is the worst of it in terms of getting everything configured. So one thing to keep in mind when you go through this exercise, whether it's on your own using the APIC in the Ruston lab or in front of a customer, it's very, very important that you use an F5 device that is pristine. You pretty much want to do a TMSH load sysconfig default command. Go into device groups, make sure there is absolutely nothing here. You really want to start off with an F5 device that has nothing on it but a license and a management IP, so it can be discovered by iWorkflow. If the customer insists on using something else that has a configuration on it already, I would definitely make sure that unit is create another boot partition with a level of TMOS that's supported in this configuration in this environment. The other thing too is there is support documentation on the F5 website as to the different matrices of supported APIC, iWorkflow, Big IP. So it's important to make sure that you use a supported version. Thank you for watching, and if you have any questions, please contact me.